eSports experience. The latest Battlefield titles are not really games you associate with eSports in the way we do with other games. If I said to you, what are the biggest eSports games right now, I could probably name the three you're most likely to say. Dota 2, League of Legends, and Counter-Strike, CSGO. These would more than likely be one of the ones you would mention. They are the biggest eSports games right now, with the biggest prize purses. Battlefield has an eSports scene, but it certainly isn't one that has been helped really by the developers or has really grown to any amazing size. It's a scene that has been carved out by the community because of their love for Battlefield titles, even if they don't love Battlefield 4. A lot of the top level players played Battlefield 2, and even titles before that, 8v8, and they come from playing competitive Battlefield of old, and they come from that heritage. Some, of course, are younger and came in at Battlefield 3, which for all its faults was actually a very good game towards the end of its life in both public and competitive environments, but it still had plenty of flaws. What it had going for it is it was actually very entertaining to watch. The problem was you couldn't watch it because it didn't have a spectator mode, and that was one of the downsides to Battlefield 3. Fast forward then to the release of Battlefield 4, and we found ourselves in a situation where there is a community who are trying their hardest to make a competitive game happen, but in reality, the game really isn't suited to 5v5s or esports whatsoever. Sure, we have been given 4 seasons of EMS, which for those of you who don't know, it's a tournament that is run by ESL or the Electronic Sports League, and we are currently in our last season. It has 4 cups, each culminating with a LAN final with around €20,000 up for grabs at each event. Now that sounds great, doesn't it? But that is something that's been done by the developers so people would play it competitively, and that's fantastic, but that is the only reason people are playing it competitively, because otherwise they wouldn't, because the game just doesn't work for it. And that's the sad truth. If Counter-Strike or CSGO didn't have £1 million prize money or 250,000, people would still play it because it's actually a great game to play 5v5. That can't be said for Battlefield 4. Without that money, most of the teams, if not all of them, would have stopped playing months ago and moved on to another game. So how has the new patch helped the game? Well, sure, it's made the game better in a lot of ways, most notably the netcode, as we like to call it. It's definitely sharper, and overall the game feels a lot better, but it's still not right. The biggest problem with competitive Battlefield 4 is the game mode. Domination is a terrible mode for esports, and almost everyone who plays it right now in a competitive or professional environment will agree. It's too random to play, and most importantly to watch. It is extremely boring and hard to keep on top of what's going on. DICE have worked on a new game mode called Obliteration Small for esports, but is it not a little bit late now? It's been released and ESL will be testing it, but it's now 18 months after the release of Battlefield 4 and only 5 months or so before the next Battlefield title is released. Also, we are already in the middle of our last season of EMS, which is already domination. So where exactly is this obliteration mode going to fit in? I just don't see it. Are they going to do another LAN? Throw more money at it? I'm not convinced. I have always felt that Battlefield could be a really good esports game if just some time and effort and just some thought was put in by the developers into that aspect of the game. I don't just mean saying the magic words people want to hear, like esports for example. Saying we have made a game for esports or we are focused on esports doesn't mean anything if the game mode clearly isn't any good for competitive play. And I also understand that esports is a very small percentage of the game, so why would they put any time or thought into it? And I appreciate that thought process. The problem is, if you're going to throw words like esports around, then you have to be able to back it up with actual features that are designed for esports, or don't mention it full stop. So where do we go from here? Well, let me say this. I love Battlefield. I had so much fun with older Battlefield titles, Battlefield 2, Battlefield 2142. I loved Battlefield 3 in a casual sense and a competitive one. I put so many hours into it. I love Battlefield 4. I think it can be a fun game, but a competitive game, in my eyes, it is not. It is not a good competitive game. It feels sometimes, no matter what you do, nothing works. Sometimes it feels like people will kill you in one bullet, and you can't seem to kill them in 10. Now, playing esports means that you're playing a higher caliber of player than you normally would, so that has to be taken into account, but it doesn't matter how good you are if you are shooting them in the back and still nothing happens. It makes no sense how I can play one of the best teams, ranking-wise, in the top 4 and do extremely well, and then the next game I can play a team in the top 10 and not be able to get a single hit on them. That doesn't make sense. And it feels like every time I play Battlefield in a 5v5 on this server, on that server, against these different people, the experience is always completely different. And that doesn't make for a good esports game. There is also no doubt in my mind I was significantly better at Battlefield 3 than I am at Battlefield 4. There's no getting around that, it's fact. I know that. There is also no getting around the fact that I feel limited playing Battlefield 4. I feel as though if I react faster than the other guy, that doesn't guarantee I will get the kill as it once did in Battlefield 3 or even in CSGO, for example. It just doesn't feel like if I am playing better, that necessarily translates to playing better, if that makes sense. Sometimes it just feels like I'm hitting my head against a brick wall, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that feels that way. Lastly, I'm not convinced in Battlefield Hardline as an esports title. I have played the game and I've had a ton of fun with it, and I will play it a considerable amount when it comes out, don't get me wrong. I actually think it will be a good game. I've got high hopes for it in terms of fun and being a good game, don't get me wrong. But as an esports game, I don't have high hopes. Of all the game modes announced so far, I fail to see any that would work in an esports environment. And so until something happens that will change my mind, I feel that Battlefield esports as we know it is slowly going in the wrong direction, and I'm not really sure if it's going to be coming back up for air. Thanks for listening, guys, and remember, stay calm and listen to Hadouken.